All right. Today we'll be talking about the amygdala, the amygdaloid complex, and the physiology of it. We'll be talking about two very important functions that are involved. One is fear conditioning, and the other is reward or appetitive conditioning. And I can also put over here that this could be aversive conditioning. All right. So probably the most well-studied function of the amygdala is the aversion and fear conditioning aspect. So let's write up here, fear conditioning. And we'll be breaking this down into three different sections. First is pre, then we'll talk about intra-amygdala processing, and then post-amygdala processing. So before it gets to the amygdala, while the information's at the amygdala, and then what happens after the information has been processed. All right. So as an example, I'll be talking about vision and visual pathway. And so we'll have information be coming in from the optic nerve, and these will be going to the thalamus, which is the sensory relay station within the brain, commonly known as a sensory relay station. A lot of sensory information passes through the thalamus, and then this information will go to the visual cortex. So as an example, V1, V2, V4. And then it will go to the temporal lobe for the associational areas. And you might also see, if you study these in more depth, that there is a dorsal and ventral pathway. Talked about when we're looking at sensory information processing, and after it's being processed at the visual cortex or the auditory cortex, the information will split into two different pathways. So there's two important things to make note of here. The thalamus is going to send information down to the amygdala. The temporal lobe is also going to send information to the amygdala. Now this will be the fast pathway. This will be the slow pathway. And the idea behind these two pathways is that this fast pathway carries in data very quickly into the amygdala for processing fear and dangerous situations, whereas this temporal lobe brings in much more detail-rich processing of this, in this case, visual information to hand off to the amygdala before it outputs into, for example, memory or autonomic responses to the situation. And so these are two important pathways to understand within fear conditioning for how they affect the information before it gets to the amygdala. All right. So secondly, talk very quickly about intra-amygdalar processes. Intra-amygdala. We'll have the sensory input come in, and it will be coming into the lateral nucleus, if you remember from the video, in the basolateral complex, and then the central nucleus is going to output an autonomic response. And the idea with this intra-amygdala processing is that with the UCS or US or UCS, which is unconditioned stimulus or conditioned stimulus, that the pairing of the strong unconditioned stimulus with a weak conditioned stimulus makes the conditioned stimulus stronger, and the idea is that there's some Hebbian learning mechanics that are happening internally within this basolateral complex, which affect this process of attaching a conditioned stimulus to an unconditioned stimulus and making it stronger. And as a working example, in case you're not so familiar with conditioning, this would be, for example, the shock tone experiment, where the physical shock, the electrical shock, is paired with a tone, and this tone has no positive or negative significance, but this obviously has a quite negative effect on the organism. And the pairing of these two things in close proximity attaches them, and the idea is that this process is strengthened within the basolateral complex. All right. And now we just have the post-amygdala processes. So post-amygdala, there's going to be two things that happen. There's going to be a fear response and a stress response. The fear response will be to the brainstem. So we have the central amygdala outputting to the brainstem. And so we're going to have autonomic arousal, decreased pain sensitivity, and reflex potentiation. And as an example, if someone is to startle you out of fear, you're going to have a reflexive response to the threat. Now, for a stress response, this is going to come from the hypothalamus, and this will increase the heart rate, sweat more, increase blood pressure, and most importantly, adrenaline and cortisol production. And this all takes place with, you may have heard this before, but the HPA axis, where we have the hypothalamus working with the pituitary gland working with the adrenal glands to produce this downstream adrenaline cortisol response to the stress. All right. Sorry, I just need a sec to finish cleaning up. And so now we'll talk about a second type, and this is a more positive and typically less known function of the amygdala, but it is that the amygdala does play a role in this reward conditioning. And there's a lot of research going on into how this works, but I will just describe briefly some things that are known about it. There are 4 different areas that are going to be involved. There'll be more than 4, but I will just be talking about 4. We have the VTA, which is the ventral tegmental area, the NA, the nucleus accumbens, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex. All right. And so how does this reward pathway look? Well, first we have the ventral tegmental area down in the brainstem. And this is a very important area you've probably heard of that is a large producer of dopamine for the dopaminergic pathways. It's one of the three, it's the beginning of one of the three major pathways. So, right, major DA pathway. All right. And the VTA outputs to quite a few areas, one of which is the amygdala. So it's going to be up a bit higher. Then the nucleus accumbens, which is going to be about over here. And I'll try and draw a little brain over this as I finish. And then we'll have the prefrontal cortex up here. All right, and these pathways will look something like this. I have to draw all the way around there like that. And as such, let me make sure I have all the pathways. Yes, that should be everything. And these two pathways right here, be glutamatergic. That's right. And these pathways with the three lines, and remember this is going not through the amygdala, but to the prefrontal cortex. These pathways will be dopaminergic. Okay. And so quickly, I'll just talk about what is known for each of these areas. And so for the VTA, it's responsible for beginning this DPA pathway, the mesolimbic pathway. So we can say start of the mesolimbic pathway. The nucleus accumbens is going to mediate the outcome between higher order cognitive functions and affect. All right, so this will be, you can think of this as prefrontal cortex and amygdala, loosely speaking. The amygdala is going to establish the emotional value. And the prefrontal cortex is going to determine actionable outcomes. Determine action. All right. And so this should be good for right now for these fear and reward. I will be talking more about other functions of the amygdala as well as studies, and I've been thinking about maybe doing history of the amygdala as well. But these are two areas that are, I think, beneficial to study at the same time, two functions of the amygdala. All right, thank you.